Chapter 16. Docking struts released. The 500,000-ton lander first parted from the mothership Razia on retros. When it was at a safe distance, its powerful impulse thrusters in, pushing it down and away, deeper into the hold of the hive world's gravity. The USS Anteater descended. This was still the part of space travel that Kozlowski had never gotten used to, planetfall. She remembered when she was a little girl, before the aliens came. She had taken a ride on a roller coaster at the amusement park. She thought for sure, despite the strong and reassuring presence of her father, when the coaster took a long-angled dip, that she was going to fall out. Now, as the lander tilted down and began its powered descent, as her heart filled her throat, that was the way she felt here. Only if she fell, she knew it would be forever. She desperately wanted a tab of fire. Maybe she was going to need it, she thought. Maybe Kozlowski, now without her drug, would be a crippled foot to the mission. Later, she told herself, she'd make that decision later. Initially parted from the foe gravity of the Razia, there had been the heavy feeling of null gravity. But then as the ship descended, she felt the butterflies flutter into her stomach and then shoot up the back door to climb her spine. Then the G's started kicking in. The retros roared, slowing them down. Ablation reddened the hull slightly before a force shield kicked in. Landers went down much too quickly for Kozlowski's taste. She much preferred the molly-coddling you got on a passenger shuttle. A slow, smooth descent. Freaking marine landers, though, acted like sperm charging out of the gate for an appointment with a pretty egg. They were still well above the clouds, but the atmosphere started buffering the lander, shaking it like a toy. Kozlowski gritted her teeth. She looked over. The other troops looked intent. Some just had their eyes closed. Daniel Grant looked a bit green at the gills. Kozlowski suspected that she didn't look all that great herself, but there was no place to powder her nose now. The suits had temp controls, but they were open now and the air conditioning wasn't on. The cabin's air control wasn't working well, and it was a bit hot and humid. Kozlowski could smell her own sweat. It was a comforting smell. What she didn't like much was the sweat from the others. "Turbulence!" called Fitzwilliam, up in a pilot blister with the best view. She'd chosen Lenny Fitzwilliam herself. He was a top expert at this kind of planetfall, a ranging, muscular guy who could have been the reincarnation of one of those crazy pilots who broke the barrier between Earth and space back in the 20th century. His wife had just died, and this was his way of getting back some life in himself, in what he knew best. "No shit, Sherlock," said Tank Tenares. He flipped on the PA. "No smoking, no trips to the can, fasten seatbelts, all that stuff. It's going to be a rocky one." "Going to be," said Grant weakly. Tenares never exaggerated. He was a short, stocky guy with a buzz cut and a two-dimensional way of looking at the universe, which made him a gem in this kind of piloting situation. With his fierce concentration branded in those dark eyes of his below that sloping brow, he cut straight through problems to the solutions. He could drink everyone under the table but herself. Kozlowski knew. He'd tried. He had a mordant sense of humor that was just what Kozlowski needed to hear now. I'm reading some pretty fierce mid-atmospheric activity. This place ain't exactly paradise. The lander began to rock and jerk violently. This continued for some minutes. Kozlowski suspected that there was going to be some gouges in the armrest after this from the digging in of fingers, including hers. Nobody puked, though. That was something. The twirling lengths of gray cottony clouds seemed to reach up like an ocean of mist and absorb them. The rattling and rocking continued and then calmed down. "Okie dokie, folks," said Fitzwilliam. "We're through the worst of it. We should be done in about 35 minutes, so sit back and enjoy the flight." Kozlowski took a luxurious breath of bad air. It tasted good through slightly less constricted lungs. "Can't see a goddamn thing," said Argento, the dark-haired mustached sergeant who sat behind her. Argento's brooding eyes and bushy eyebrows and bushier mustache made Tenares look like the Blue Boy. He was like a Neanderthal with all that hair and stolid attitude, but there wasn't a man in the corps who knew his way around artillery, light or heavy, better. Kozlowski had worked with Argento the year before, and when the possibility of his coming along arose, she grabbed it. He had a rich, deep voice that inspired confidence in him from the get-go. He was a man's man and a fine poker player, too. "Do you really want to?" said Jastrow, suddenly talkative. "If ignorance is bliss, let's enjoy it for another half hour, huh? Me, I'm just going to rest my eyes." That seemed like a good idea to Kozlowski. Unfortunately, she was too high-strung to give herself even that much of a treat. She had to see it all. Somewhere in this hellish cloud cover might be something she needed. In the first break, when she got the lay of the land, that might make a change in her strategy that might save lives, might give this mission the edge it needed for a thorough success. So for long minutes she watched as the lander pierced the cloud cover. Occasional comments arose from the troops, but generally there was silence. Finally, the cloud cover started to break up. Kozlowski peered out through the port. As far as she could tell, there was still a couple of miles up, but she could make out some of the landscape below. She'd seen pictures of it before, of course, in her studies of this godforsaken planet. Like Mars, the report had said, a few mountains, lots of volcanoes, but for the most part flat and peaked. More atmosphere than Mars. Breathable even. Not nice though. Not nice at all. The pictures had clued her in to the starkness, the hellish wasteland quality this place had. There was something stricken about it. Something unholy. Kozlowski wasn't a religious person, but that was the first word that came to her mind. Unholy. Damned was the second. Shakespeare could have used it for his blasted Heath in the play Macbeth. "Still can't see much down there through the cloud cover," Fitzwilliam was saying. "Anything coming through the telemetry topography scan?" said Tenares. "Hey, what do you know? Calculation's totally correct. The sucker's down there." A thrill of elation filled Kozlowski. The moment the Razia had entered parking orbit, its heavy-duty sensors on full power had gotten to work. The coordinates of the original alien hive were known, and sure enough, it didn't take long to locate the ugly hive, poking up from the flat land like a huge, unlanced boil. "What the hell is this?" "What?" "Just take a look, will you?" Begali's eyes grew bright with excitement. I suspected as much. Yes. About 100 miles away from the original hive, there was another hive, a hive shaped differently from the original, according to the sensors. Sure enough, up close, the sensors were showing it was indeed an alien hive. So far, so good. Now they just had to determine if it was the flavor alien they wanted. The misty cloud swirled away from the ship, and they got a better view. Somehow, even from way up here, Kozlowski could tell that things weren't quite right. Geez, she heard Tenerez say. This unit checks out, so this reading must be correct. Yeah, so what's it say? Fitzwilliam shot back. Well, judging from the surface activity, she could hear the slight gulp in Tenerez's voice, breaking up that Jaeger effect. There's some kind of war going on down there. Let me look. Grant's eyes were suddenly open and eager. He strained forward on his belt, his hands frantically scrambling at the catches. Grant, she barked at him. We haven't landed. Keep your goddamn butt parked. We don't want your brains all over the ceiling. Grant halted his efforts to release himself. Nonetheless, his desire to see what was going on down there had not diminished. What's going on, Begali? Talk to me. How does this work into your high-flown theories? Begali was wearing a shit-eating grin. Couldn't be sweeter, boss. We're looking at aliens swarming like ants around the hive. And that's supposed to be sweet? Said Grant. Kozlowski wasn't too worried. They had the technology to deal with this. Just the detail. The brass were going to like this. They were going to be able to check out how the new stuff worked. You bet. You ever hear of the Xenos fighting among themselves, wholesaler Colonel? Nope. Not the batch that came to Earth. Exactly. Because they were all the same breed, the same race. They smelled the same to each other. They worked together. The fact that there's conflict down there tends to prove that what we suspected would happen has... Like what? Demanded Jastrow, eyes round and a little protruding with fear. Kozlowski didn't blame him. Looked like a goddamn African ant war down there. Hundreds and thousands of the bastards swarming. Okay. Classified material. Sorry. Shouldn't have brought it up in front of the troops, said Grant. That pissed Kozlowski off, but she didn't say anything. Wouldn't do the soldiers any good anyway. Would just take their minds off the job at hand. Nonetheless, she knew what Grant was talking about. And damn it, it did make sense. She just hoped it wouldn't complicate things, mucking over the mission beyond redemption. The theory was, of course, that aliens without a controlling queen would branch off into different packs. Breeding might, and apparently did, give rise to bugs with recessive traits. If these bugs were allowed to continue to breed, the result would be a new race, and hurry over to start up a new hive, complete with a new queen. This was a new hive here. Call them the Democrats. But apparently, the old fart bugs had gotten things together and spawned a new queen mother, and millions of workers. And although the new Democrat hive was a long way away, eventually they located it. Their queen mother had sent off her armies to destroy the interlopers into the genetic xeno broth. Call them the Republicans. She looked out at the troops. There were naked questions beside the fear and misgiving in their eyes. What are you assholes looking at? Plan C takes this kind of situation into account. She smiled grimly. Just look at it this way. We're going to be able to kill more bugs. Plan C. Plan C starts the same way they all do. Land as close to the hive as possible. There are thousands of aliens down there now. Colonel Kozlowski grinned. And hopefully there will be thousands there when we land, only burnt aliens. Grant shook his head. Well, I guess these bugs aren't the only specialists in genocide. They continued their descent.